Be bold. Be heard. Welcome to Unmute Your Mic with your host, Jessica Bell. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Unmute Your Mic.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Unmute Your Mic. My name is Jessica Bell. I am your host from Kansas City, Missouri. And today I have Steve Holder as a special guest. So I'm really excited to get to hear his story. I've actually had the privilege, the honor to be on his podcast a couple of times. And so I'm really excited to get to know the man behind the podcast, some of his stories, some of the things that he's overcome and experienced. And so, Steve, I wanted to thank you for being on my platform today. And if you could just let us know a little bit about you.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me on, Jessica. I always enjoy talking to you. I was born in Kingsport, Tennessee, and I've raised in Johnson City, Tennessee. That's in the northeastern corner of the state, in case you don't know. And I didn't come from what you call a dirt poor family, but we didn't have a lot neither. We always had food to eat and a home to live in. But other than that, we just had the bare necessities. I guess you could say I came from a dysfunctional family. We were very religious. I grew up Southern Baptist, and my parents were Christian people. They tried to raise me right, and they did, but they only had a sixth grade education, and they grew up during the Depression. So they was trying to raise me, and I was the fourth kid. The other three are girls. And my youngest sister is 7 years older than me. So when I came along 7 years after all the girls, it was a totally different world, nobody knew what to do with me. And And I had a lot of issues, I had a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression. I didn't realize it at the time, but, looking back on it, I see that was what was going on. And when I got into my teen years, I got a job at a local car wash when I was 16. And, I started working at a restaurant first, washing dishes for 75 cents an hour. And then I got a big raise to go to the car wash. I got $1 an hour. And the people that I worked with at the car wash, most of them were about my age, and they were heavy drinkers. And I wanted badly to fit in. And I allowed them to teach me how to be a drinker. And they definitely taught me well. So I drank a lot, had a lot of problems based on that. And actually, even though I didn't know it then, I was an alcoholic by the time I was 18 years old. I was really bad shape. And I joined the Army right after I turned 18, and I had big dreams. I wanted to serve my country, and I wanted to take advantage of the GI Bill to go to college and get a good education and all. But my drinking and my drugging, I got into other drugs also, became so bad in the Army that I just couldn't do the things that were expected of me. And to make that long story short, it ended up with me getting out of the Army a lot sooner than I was supposed to, and not in a way that I was supposed to. So that caused a lot of problems, a lot of chaos, and I've done a lot of drugs and a lot of drinking over the years. And to make that story short as possible, when I was 28 before I finally got help for my drinking. And I joined Alcoholics Anonymous. I got into that, and it was a struggle for a while, of course, but I finally learned to live without drugs and alcohol, and I thank God and AA for that. And now I've been clean and sober for 36 years. So that's definitely something in the past, but it's definitely something that helped make me who I am today. And it's helped me to be able to help a lot of people also.
Yeah.
So
I
that's
love
my
that
story.
I love that you said it's in the past, but it helped shape who you are today.
Definitely.
Because I think that's a really important piece of our stories, that we're
Yeah.
able to look back on the things that we have gone through and say, we if we could have rewritten our stories, maybe we would choose a different path, but we wouldn't be who we are today if
Yeah.
we didn't go through those things. And
Yeah.
so since you've been clean for over 30 years, what was that transition like early on? What was that transition like of going through life kind of, uh,
Yeah.
under some type of fog in a
Yeah.
sense, to being
Well,
clean? What was that like for you?
well, imagine going out to the lake and reaching in and grabbing a fish and throw it up on the bank and say, "You're going to have to live there from now on." That's kind of what it felt like. Like ain't no way this is going to work. So it was hell for a while. I mean, I ain't going to lie. When you're trying to get clean and sober and you're an addict, it's hell for a while. Because nothing's right. Everything crazy is going on in your head, and I didn't know how to function as a regular person. All the people that I hung around with for years were drinkers and druggers, and I didn't know how to have just a common conversation. And I thought that my life was always going to be dull and boring and no fun, and I'd never have any friends. I'd never have anything, and it was just doom and gloom. So it was a slow process, and it takes time, but it gets better over a period of time as long as you do the things that you need to do.
So,
And
what do you think? What made you not give up? Because I've heard a lot of stories of people who have tried to get clean and just couldn't. So, what do you think it was in you? What was it that you were kind of seeking or chasing after that made you say, "This is not as good as my life can get"?
well, I have heard it say that the difference between those who make it and those who don't. The people that make it have just a little bit of self respect left to where they don't want to die in that position. And I was waking up every day and saying, well, it's another effing day and I have to live it. I mean, that's where I was. And I did have quite a few ins and outs, stumbles and relapses along the way for a while. But then that finally ended when I stayed clean and sober for 14 months. And then I decided I didn't want to be clean and sober anymore. So I went back out one night and thought I wanted to have a good time, but it wasn't such a good time. So, that lasted. I drank and smoked pot pretty much all that night with some other people. And the next day, I was wanting to kill myself. So that's when I went, called a friend in AA to take me back to a meeting, and I started all over again. So I started the calendar all over again at that point, and I knew then that it was a matter of life or death. And that's what I needed to learn. It wasn't just a matter of do I want to live sober or do I want to live drunk. It was then that I realized I cannot live like this anymore. If I drink again, I will kill myself. And I still believe that to this day because I literally meant that. And so that's what's made the difference. I had to get to the point where I realized it was a matter of life and death, and I didn't want to die that way, you know?
Yeah, that's no, that's real. And that, I mean, when you have to have those kind of conversations with yourself, I mean, those aren't easy conversations to have,
No,
and you have to really face yourself in that moment and say,
yeah,
what am I going to do next? And
yeah,
so, I mean, it's so interesting to hear this part of your life, because when me and you have had conversation, we're talking about our faith and God and all these things. But I think that's what's so beautiful about your story, even, is that there are all these things behind the scenes that just a normal conversation you don't get from somebody. And
right,
so
right.
can I ask you, in what part in your life did your faith really become the forefront? Have you been a believer your whole life, or is it something that kind of happened later on in your life?
Well, since I was brought up as a very strict Southern Baptist, when I was 7 years old, I remember telling my dad once, I said, when the pastor gives them altar calls, I feel funny. I don't understand why. And then he said, well, son, it sounds like you need to give your life to the Lord. So I did that the next Sunday. I was 7 years old, and granted, I hadn't done a lot of sinning, but, I felt like the Lord, wanted me to accept him. So I did that. And so that's when I became a Christian. But when I got into drugs and alcohol as a teenager, naturally that got pushed aside. And when I got, uh, when I was, I think, 22, a long time before I ever really went to AA, I did decide at one point that I was going to quit drinking, quit smoking cigarettes, quit drugs, quit my job, go on a diet, and do all this at the same time, and so I did that and had a little bit of success for a while, but I stayed sober, I think maybe a year and a half at that point. And during that time, I got back into church, and I even felt a call to ministry. So I talked about that with my parents and with my pastor, and of course I got all kinds of encouragement. And our pastor at that time got me preaching engagements, and he had me preaching at rescue missions and different churches and things. So I did that for a while, but I didn't have that recovery experience that I needed from the people in AA that had been through it. The people that really knew about the craziness going on in my head. I needed to hear something other than Jesus loves you. I mean, I ain't minimizing that, but people in church didn't have a clue about what was really going on with me, and part of that was because I didn't tell them. But anyway, if you haven't been through this, you don't really understand. It's like if a mother tries to tell a man what it's like to have a baby. We can listen, we can say, okay, I think I understand, but we don't really. But so that's kind of what it's like to expect somebody that hasn't been through it to understand all the insanity that goes on in our heads. And so went back to the Lord during that period. Is where I'm going with this. But anyway, then I went back to drinking and drugging again, so I lost it. So it's been an off and on thing over the years. And AA helped me get back in touch with my spirituality, even though it's not a Christian organization. But it is a spiritual program. So that got me back into dealing with my relationship with God, which eventually brought me back to Christ. And, that's been a off and on rocky road too. But, thank God he brought me through it.
Yeah, and I think you said something really important when you were talking. When you said that the people in church, you needed to hear something other than just Jesus loves you. And
Yeah.
so, like you said, there's no minimizing that statement, because that statement does hold a lot of weight, and it is very real and very
Absolutely.
important. But like you
Yeah.
said, when we're struggling with things, it is important that we are around people who have experienced something similar, so that they
Yeah.
know, like you said, what is exactly going on in our head. And I think
Yeah.
that that's really important, because the church itself and God though he can't heal us and he does heal us, he also gives us the wisdom to be around people to help us along the journey so
Yeah,
that we're not doing life alone. And you
yeah,
can be a believer and also say, I need some additional help other than maybe just me
exactly.
reading my Bible every day.
Yeah.
Um, and do you think that maybe for you was kind of when it went from like religion to relationship with God? If you are just now tuning in to this episode of Unmute Your Mic, I'm currently talking to Steve Holder, and today we are discussing his story and overcoming all the obstacles he did as far as getting clean, anxiety, and depression. Please continue to listen now.
Uh, yeah, it did, and it's been a process. Uh, Back in the days when I was really into preaching, I thought I knew a lot about God. I thought that I was some kind of a spiritual guru. But looking back on that, I didn't know, nothing really about God's love and the relationship. One of the big things that we teach people in AA, there is a God, but it's not you. Now, it may sound like that's something you don't need to tell people, but people that are going through alcohol and drug addiction, they're so used to playing God, not really realizing it, but the alcohol and the drugs become like an idol. You got to have that, and that's your life. And when you don't have it, you're trying to get it. And so it's a process.
And like you said, with life in general, everything is a process. Nothing is just like, oh, I've got this figured out. Like you said, I feel like I love God and I have a relationship with Him, but there is so much that I know I haven't even really truly tapped into all
Yeah.
that God is. And I probably never I can live to be 500 years old and I still wouldn't be able to. But so I wanted to continue with your story. So you talked about so you went to the military and you got out of the military, you got clean. And so what has the second half of your life look like? What does your life look like after you've gotten clean, after you left the military? What did you decide you wanted to do and pursue?
Well, believe it or not, I had a harder time keeping a job sober than I did when I was drinking. And so I went through a lot of jobs over the years. I know that probably sounds strange, but when I was drinking, I didn't have any ambition and I didn't even have an education. So I went after I got sober, I got my GED and then went on to college and then went on and got my associate degree, then the master's, and a doctorate. So I'd done all of this sober. But still, while I was doing all of that, I was going through a lot of jobs. And it just, like I say, when I was drinking, I didn't know that I had anything better to do. So I was always just say, well, I'm just trying to get through the day. I didn't have any dreams. They had all vanished a long time ago when I was a teenager. So I had to learn how to think that there possibly could be some hope. And for a long time as well, there probably not any for me, but I guess I was stubborn enough to keep trying. And anybody that knows me knows I'm stubborn. So sometimes that works in my favor.
I was going to say, some of those qualities about ourselves that we think might not be the best can be the very thing that is what makes us different enough to
Yes.
get to the other side. Because had you had not been stubborn, you might have just thrown in the towel and said, I'm done
Yeah.
and I'm over this.
Yeah.
And so as you were looking for, you said you were going through different jobs. Did that continue for a long time, or did you kind of land somewhere or figure out what you were passionate about and wanted to do?
That pretty much carried on up until I got to the point several years ago where I had to get on disability, so I couldn't work anymore. And some of that had to do with my depression and anxiety, and some of it had to do with some physical, things. But it got to the point about 10 years ago that I just couldn't work anymore. But yeah, it was always a struggle. It was always a struggle. That was just part of being me for whatever reason.
And so, over the last, you said 10 years, over the last 10 years, what has been some of the things that you have really looked back in your life and said, I'm glad that happened? I know that might be a weird question because we're talking about some things that you had to overcome, but you've had some time to kind of really reflect in a way that everyone doesn't always get, because sometimes people who live that lifestyle, they never get to be on the other side and say, right, wow, look at me over here. Yeah. So what has that reflection process been like?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked that, because percentage-wise, very few alcoholics and addicts ever even try to get help. The ones that try to get help, that's very few. And out of the ones that do try initially, most of them don't make it, because at some point they give up and they say, I can't do this. So it's by the grace of God that I kept on keeping on. Okay, let me just put that out there first. But I had to do a lot of soul searching, and a couple of years ago, I don't know if I've told you this or not, but I wrote my autobiography and published it. And it's called No One Walks Alone. And in that book, I talk about my struggles with anxiety and depression and addiction. And I also share a lot of the victories that I've had, a lot of the spiritual battles and ministry experiences and things. So that was very cathartic for me to write that. I mean, I dug down deep. I put myself out there, and sometimes I'd write something and say, I ain't telling people this, but I wanted there to be a record. I don't have kids, or so no grandkids, nobody to carry on my name. So I thought, well, I'm going to do something. I'm going to put it on record of what Steve Holder was, good and the bad. So in the future, if anybody's interested, they want to say, who was this guy? They can read that and say, okay, I got it. I know who he was. So that was a very good experience for me. And it kind of helped me to put a lot of things in perspective.
And I love that. It's like you're creating your legacy for yourself. Like you said, years down the line, when you've gone to glory, there will be somebody who says, who was he? Or they're watching your YouTube videos, and they want to know more about you. And I think that's so powerful, because you're using your story in that way. And you never know who's going to be the person to read it, and it sparks something inside of them. People always say, if you just change one person's life, that may have been the sole purpose as to why you were going through certain things. So I did want to spend a couple of minutes talking about the fact that you too also have a podcast. And I wanted to ask you, what made you start your podcast? Because you've had some very interesting guests on your show.
I might have mentioned this to you before, but last year I ran for U.S. Congress in my district, and I had several interviews from the media, of course. And when you're in politics, they ask you all kinds of questions, and you're supposed to know the answers just real quick. You're supposed to have it all. You can't say, I don't know, or I don't care, But anyway, I had to do a lot of fast thinking on those interviews. And I just found myself a lot of times thinking, well, gee, I'd like to be the one asking the questions, and I kept that in the back of my mind. And so later on this year, I got to thinking about that, and I thought, well, gee, I might just try that. So a couple of people that had interviewed me even before I could get media interviews were podcasters, and they had allowed me on their show, so I invited them to come on mine, and they helped me to build my courage up, and just one thing after another, and that I think that's kind of turned into an addiction, but but I'm having fun with it. It's called Holding On with Holder, and I'd record them on Zoom and then upload them to YouTube and then share them on Facebook and Twitter and Tumblr and different places. And I'm really having fun doing it. It's just like my hobby now, I guess.
Yeah, what is it like to be able to have these conversations with people who you would have never met in any other way in life? I know for me, having my own podcast, I've been able to have such great connections with people where I feel like in the real world,
Yeah.
I mean, how would you ever get to really know somebody, and you talk to people who are not in your same city. So what do you think has been your biggest takeaway so far with just, hearing people's stories and connecting with them?
Well, I enjoy it, and it's helped me to come out of my shell. Believe it or not, I'm a very shy person. I really am. So getting into politics last year and doing the podcast and all this, it's just a whole new me. But yeah, I've interviewed a lot of different people, different backgrounds, and different countries. I interviewed a wrestler in Russia not too long ago, and I interviewed a few authors in England, and it's really fun. And I get to meet all kinds of cool people and talk to them, and it's just we have a good time, and it is what it is.
And I don't want to skate over this. You mentioned about being in politics or running. What made you decide to do that? Because that's definitely not something that everybody just decides to do. What led you to that place?
I plead temporary insanity on that one. I've always said you don't have to be crazy to get into politics, but it helps. I don't know. It was just, I got tired of seeing all the millionaires and billionaires run and get elected and buying their elections. And I thought, well, it's time just a regular human being that don't have a lot of money to spend and all that political power, just represent the regular working class common people. And so that's what I did. I ran as an independent, and I didn't even try to raise any funds. I spent less than $100 on my campaign. But I got almost 9,000 votes, and I learned a lot, and I was called a lot of names. And
well, listen, 9,000 votes. I mean, that's way more than I would probably get. I mean, because I think that's awesome though, because that's again another part of your legacy and your story, and something that you get to say that you did that not many people, I mean, there's only a handful of people in this world who can say that they've even experienced that. So I think that's so awesome.
Yeah, I got myself in the history books, so people can't forget me now.
Right? You're making a name for yourself. I think that is so awesome. Steve, I really enjoyed talking to you this way. And I'm sorry that our 30 minutes are almost up, but I did want to give you a couple minutes to encourage somebody who is listening, maybe somebody who has struggled with anxiety or depression or addiction, or just needs to feel like they need to get their life back on track. Can you just give them some inspiring words that they can take away from this interview?
Yeah, I can say I know what it feels like to lose all hope. There's been a lot of nights during my life that I went to bed and prayed, God, help me to feel better or die. I really don't care which. And I meant that every time I said that. There's been several times in my life that I knew, well, I can't live through this. No way I can ever get through this. And if I do, I'm going to be miserable, and I don't want, totally void of any hope. I've been there several times in my life, drunk and sober. So if that's where you are, even, you may not believe it, but there is hope. You're still alive, so there is hope. And there are people that will help you. Reach out, be honest, put yourself out there, talk to people, find the help you need. If you need help with alcohol or drugs, get into AA or NA or whatever. There's plenty of people that can help, but you gotta want it, and you gotta want it badly. And when you start to get that help, don't give up when it gets rough, because it will be rough for a while, but it can get better as long as you're willing to do what you need to do to change your life. And don't forget to let God help.
Thank you so much, Steve. Those words were encouraging for sure and very true and real. I thank you so much for being on my podcast today. It has been a pleasure. I'm honored to know you, to continue to get to know you. You are definitely one of a kind. And I want to thank everybody for listening to another episode of Unmute Your Mic. As always, you can connect with us on unmuteyourmic.org. We are on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts. I'm going to put all of Steve's information down below. Please make sure to check out his podcast, his website, his Facebook, his Instagram, every platform. I'm going to make sure to include everything down below. Stay connected with Steve Holder. He has some amazing interviews on his podcast. I thank you again, Steve. It has been an honor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. And don't forget to be bold, be heard, and continue to unmute your mic.
Thank you for tuning in to Unmute Your Mic. Be sure to tune in next time when Jessica takes her mic off mute as she continues her journey to find stories that inspire and uplift our communities.